Welcome. This is Savanta hosted online panel discussion on the rise of UX. My name is Megan Willis. I am the Qualitative Research Director at Savanta North America. I'll be leading our discussion today. First and foremost, a big thank you to our esteemed group of panelists for taking the time out of your very busy schedules to lend your expertise and perspectives to this really important, pressing topic in our industry today. And thank you to everybody who's registered and attending this webinar. So at this point, what I'd love to do is I'd love to punt the mic over to Savanta's very own Nikki Laval, EVP Innovation and Strategy, personal hero and mentor. Nikki is going to be giving us a brief presentation, kind of an overview on her experience in the UX space. So Nikki, over to you.
Thank you. And yes, before people are, getting bored already, before I've even started speaking, I just wanted to sort of set the groundwork here, which is to say that this presentation that I'm going to be giving is going to be pretty anecdotal. So this is going to be talking about my personal experience and sort of where my career started and the evolution of how I got closer to UX and how I learned more about UX. And that brings us to where we are today, where we've got this fantastic group of people who are going to talk about how their perceptions of UX and market research have evolved and adapted according to their careers and sort of where we are now and where we're going to go in the future. So with that, I'm going to do the awkward dance of trying to do the screen share while on Zoom and hope that I don't mess it up. So hopefully, can you all see my screen? Yes, I'm getting thumbs up. Okay, all good in the hood. So let's just jump right in because nobody is here to hear from me. Oh, I did a little sneak. So in 1995, a really epic thing happened. Brad Pitt was voted the sexiest man alive. In addition to that really critical point of culture for at least those of us in America, the other really great thing that happened is that a guy called Don Norman, who some of you may have heard of, he was a cognitive psychologist, I believe, working within the Apple organization at the time, small company, you may have heard of them, you might own a couple of their devices. He coined a phrase, which the phrase was user experience, which we now lovingly refer to in acronym form as UX. And so going again, reminding you all that this is a little bit anecdotal and this is about my sort of background and history. This is the Google Analytic data of the search history for user experience. So just a note for all of you kind of data geeks out there, this is not the search data for UX as an acronym. This is the search for user experience as a term. So this shows you sort of how user experience was searched for by people in the wild using Google as their search engine from January 1st, 2004 up until a few days ago when this data was pulled. So this little dot right here represents when I started my career. So for those of you who are wondering how young I am, that was in 2007. And so you can see at that point that UX at around that time was sort of relatively stable. It had dropped a tiny bit from sort of early 2004, but it was sort of remaining relatively stable in terms of how often people were searching for that phrase as a term. So back when I started my career, this is sort of the picture that I had in my mind of market research and user research. I was firmly in the market research sphere, so it seemed bigger to me. And that was what I knew more about. And I think, if I were being truly honest, probably in 2007, I had not even heard of user research and known that it was a thing. But if I did have kind of any awareness of it, it would have seemed pretty small, pretty far away, pretty separate from everything that I was doing. So skipping ahead to sort of the next period, the next moment on our timeline, this second dot actually represents when I eventually started my own business. So I started my own business. I launched a company called MindSpark Research International in 2014. So you can see that UX still in roughly around about the same place as it was in 2007. So not a whole lot of major changes in terms of other people's awareness of the phrase, but there were a couple of key things happening around that time. The idea moved fast fast and break things. We've all heard this before, but 2014, when I launched my company, actually represents a period when actually Facebook, before it was called Meta, had just stopped using this as their internal tagline. And shortly after this, around this same year, I want to say, there was actually a book published under the same name. And the purpose of the book was actually to sort of help non-tech and non-SaaS companies adopt some of the ways of working that the tech and SaaS companies were using in order to be successful. And so one of the key ideals of that was the idea of moving fast and breaking things. And right alongside it was Agile. So Agile was, again, a concept that was sort of born, if you will, in the software world. And it was the idea of being iterative. And bigger, older organizations, not even necessarily older, but other organizations that weren't tech focused, were not necessarily used to the concept of agility and the concept of being agile, or of iteration. So those two things started to come about a bit more in 2014, shortly after I started my company. And so my personal understanding of market and user research started to look a little bit more like this. I understood user research a bit more. I knew of its existence. It seemed a bit bigger to me. It seemed like maybe there was a little bit of more of a closer relationship between user and market research, but still separate functions. So the next dot on the timeline represents actually when we at MindSpark made the very deliberate decision to pivot and position ourselves as a user research agency. And if you want to know why we did that, you can look here at the search terms, and you can see that there was a notable sort of slow and steady rise in interest in user experience as a term and as a function. And to be totally frank with everybody listening in, part of the reason why MindSpark made the decision to do that was because a significant number of our clients who were calling us for what was then referred to as traditional market research qualitative, because we were a qual agency, a lot of those folks ended up transitioning over into user research roles, or were simply referring us to their other colleagues internally at bigger organizations. And those other colleagues were user researchers. So quite naturally, we started doing a lot more user research. We felt like it was really fun. There were some key differences, which I think will probably get teased out as the panel conversation starts speaking, but there were a couple of key differences in user research that made us sort of enjoy the work a little bit, maybe even more than market research. Dare I say, will I be burning any bridges with any listeners on this? Jamin's like, yep, burning a bridge with me right now. No, either that or he's agreeing with me. But we kind of felt like it was an interesting path, and we could see that it was going in a direction that we wanted to stay on. So we made the conscientious choice. And as we were getting more and more user research work in the door, I started to realize that actually the methodologies, specifically the methodologies that we were using in user research, were not so different from the ones that we were using in market research. So at that point in time, of course, my understanding of the two functions of user and market research started to look a little bit like this, a lot more overlap, a lot closer together, and a lot more equal in size. This next dot on the timeline here represents the start of the famous COVID-19 pandemic that took us all by storm, whether we wanted it to or not. So you can see that, again, at this point, user research interest in the term was still on the rise. It was a bit up and down, but in terms of trend wise, it was trending upward. And clearly you can see at another point, just after sort of midway through 2021, there was a huge increase in interest in user research. Now, why did it sort of go down for a bit? Well, I imagine that people were probably searching for other things like, where can I get masks? When is the vaccine going to be available? How efficient is the vaccine, etc. So search terms probably varied quite a lot from a lot of different reasons, but there was a huge uptick in interest in user research, specifically halfway through 2021. So at that point in time, my specific understanding of user research started to look even more overlapping. The Venn diagram is starting to look more like just two concentric circles rather than a Venn diagram. So why were things really kind of blowing up, sort of in that, let's say, period when the pandemic was still impacting us a little bit more heavily than it is now? There's a couple of key reasons. One is that more audiences engaged with brands digitally. So this graph here shows how people were engaging how people were engaging with brands digitally compared to the worldwide average. So the bottom bar represents the worldwide average accessing the mobile internet, so using mobile devices. So you can see that all of these sort of countries that are listed as above the worldwide average are countries that did not have a ton of mobile online traffic prior to the pandemic. Places like Turkey, Nigeria was online to a good degree. Kenya was coming online a lot more. India, specifically in rural India, we were seeing a lot more people coming online. Also, as people come online and specifically through their mobile phones, it also resulted in increased online spending. So you could see a lot of people were saying that they've increased the amount of online spending that they were doing compared to face-to-face spending, which made perfect sense because there was not a lot of opportunity for face-to-face spending during that time period. And then there were, of course, as there always is, certain segmentations of the population that were spending even more. So for example, 25 to 39-year-olds were spending even more than sort of the average. The other thing is that people started to really expect good experiences. So it wasn't just that they were accessing the internet. It wasn't just that they were buying things online. It's that they started to expect good experiences. So this excerpt here is from a study from Deloitte, where they actually asked participants to allocate points of importance across a variety of different factors. And here you can see the comparison of the points allocated to price factors versus experience factors for a variety of different sectors. So you can see that in most cases, experience factors outweigh price factors by quite a significant amount. I mean, the lowest score multiple we see here is 1.8, and the highest is nearly a three times multiple. On top of that, we also know that improved UX actually results in improved ROI. So things like improving a website's landing page by literally 1/10 of a second has huge amounts of impact on conversions. So 8% increase in conversion for retail sites, 10% increase in conversion for travel sites, and over 5% in improvement in customer engagement within retail. The other thing that we started to see is that people started to associate positive experiences with brand. So brand perception started to be impacted, or at least we started to notice that it was impacted by user research. And then a couple of other small bits here in terms of investment in UX. We started to know that investing in UX actually does lead to better and stronger businesses. So every dollar invested in UX brings in on average $100 in return. UX investments made earlier in conceptual phases shorten development cycles. 86% of buyers are willing to pay more for a great UX experience. 39% of people will stop engaging with a website if images take too long to load. So literally, nearly 40% of people, 4 in 10 people, if they try to access your website or your app and it takes too long to perform a function, they will leave. That's quite a significant amount of people. And as well, experience, just to kind of underscore how important a positive experience is, after just one bad experience, up to 61% of customers will take their business elsewhere. So obviously we can see that UX became significantly more important than it had been previously. So this very last dot here on the Google Analytics graph of user experience as a phrase shows when MindSpark was acquired by Savanta. So this represents when MindSpark actually sold to a bigger agency. I know Jamin's also got a similar story because launched a UX business and it was picked up. And the reason why I highlighted this wasn't simply to throw Savanta's name out there and make sure that we get some airtime, although call us, just kidding. But the real reason is actually because this really represents the fact that there is a lot of interest in user research and user experience, in experience understanding in general. So that's why this whole topic comes about CX, UX, HX, PX if you're in healthcare and you're looking at patient experience, BX if you're talking about brand experience. This last point here, one user experience focused agency was acquired, but actually mine was not the only one acquired around the same time period. So it does demonstrate that there was a lot of interest on behalf of the research agency side to ensure that there was user research understanding in-house. So with that, I will close down my boring old slides and then bring it back to Megan, who will introduce the speakers and get going with the conversation.
Thank you, Nikki. That was anything but boring. Really appreciate your thought leadership in this space. I think that's really what we're here for today. And so to that, let me introduce our esteemed guests today. We've got Scott Garrison, UX researcher. We've got Jamin Brazil, MD Hub UX, and Michaela Mora from Relevant Insights. So I would actually love to kickstart this discussion today off of, I think, some of the first half of Nikki's presentation. And Jamin, I'm going to come to you first because I'm really interested in your perceptions here. You know, I know you spent much of your career on the market research side. So I'm interested in your perspective on how much market and user research have coexisted. Are they getting closer together as Nikki's circles moved closer together? Are they moving further apart? In what ways?
Yeah, I think, you know, it used to be the case. I started my career in the mid 90s. Market research was really the only option in those days for getting to know the customer. User experience as a carve out discipline hadn't quite hit the world. And what's really interesting is you kind of like saw her Venn diagram, the divergence, right, and then the convergence. They actually started to convert at the same spot. So, you know, I was doing in-house usability labs on user experience, focused on understanding how customers interact with products. So at Intuit, for example, or at some early internet properties owned by Disney, Go.com, at Yahoo. And, you know, these are all literally on-site facilities designed to, as if you were looking at a modern lens, you would say those are UX facilities. And so I think, you know, we kind of started there. And then culturally, what we found, by we, I mean collectively we as organizations, not just researchers, is that consumer insights it became more of an accessible activity by not just professional researchers, but other people inside of the organization, especially those that are in product. And so to that end, you saw product itself start spinning up internal researchers that may not have the backgrounds in traditional market research. And so, you know, again, you kind of like Nikki's diagram is exactly right. And now today we're largely doing the same thing, but where we sit in the organization is, I think, one of the key differentiators, that plus the culture that we provide, and you know, and that subsequently, of course, when the organization turns to us for answers, right, it's a type of thing. So if it's like a pricing study, you oftentimes see that done in market research. And kind of piggybacking on the importance of UX, Watermark, which is a consultancy that analyzes the S&P 500 every year, they release a report, and last year they had identified that companies that invest in user experience, they outperform the market by 45 points. This is, again, the S&P 500. And so that's like, immediately, if you're an operator, right, a CEO or a C-level executive, like, gosh, we got to get involved. We really need to double down in user experience. But that's actually not the headline. The headline was companies that don't invest in UX, they underperform the market by 75 points. So it's more of a question of, do you want to be a business? And if the answer is yes, you better invest in UX.
Fantastic response. And Michaela, I saw you nodding, so I'd love to get your POV here.
So I have been in the market research and insights industry for a while, and I started researching digital products in 2004 when I went to work for Match.com and then went to Blockbuster Online. And at that time, UX was not a term. We just did research, which included product research people classify now as UX research. So as Jamin, I set up usability labs in-house for both companies. We were a small team, so we partnered with external research agencies to help expand capabilities and keep us honest and up to date with the latest developments, methodologies, and technologies. We had a research plan many projects using qualitative, quantitative research. We did usability testing, and we did in-depth interview, now called user interviews, focus groups, ethnographic research, positioning research, pricing research, market segmentation, concept testing, you name it. All research we did was linked to the product development process and marketing strategy goals. We work with product team, operations, PR, the analytics team, now called data science. And if you check the original definition of NNG with Don Norman as a founder, they define user experience as the resulting state of mind developed from interactions with products and services, customer support, and marketing. So UX is supposed to be the result of integrated experiences across channels. The thing is that the UX field has become focused on digital experiences. And that's part of why we grow apart, because the growth really took off in tech companies. And the key role this was played by, if you heard about the Agile Manifesto, which Nikki mentioned, it was published in 2000 by software developers who realized that it would be better to get user feedback at different points of the product development process instead of waiting until the end. And we know that many companies have adopted the Agile product development process. However, the intent of Agile has also been lost in many cases. It is the impression that we're going together, but in many cases, we are going away from it. And it was supposed to mean flexible, iterative process that would allow product improvement based on user feedback. But in many companies, it means mostly faster, cheaper product development with no user feedback. And another cause of growing apart is that many product developers, managers, designers who were thrown into the role of researchers because there were not enough, they didn't know that we existed, didn't have the training in product research for marketing. So they didn't know that we were already doing that type of research, or they had and still have many misconceptions about market research. They work in teams led by designers, engineers, no marketers. And unfortunately, market researchers didn't notice the trend until recently. Also, many tech companies don't have insights teams, and those who have them often don't have research champions at the top who can connect the dots and see that this is simply product research in the digital channel, a dimension of the user experience that needs to be understood in a larger context because users themselves don't think in channels.
It's a really fascinating point too. And I just want to bring up before turning the mic over to Scott, because Scott, I'm really interested in your perspective here coming from the UX researcher side of the industry. And that's, we've got Mariana in the chat talking about UX isn't something that just exclusively lives in this digital space. It extends beyond that. And I think that that's something that I'd like to carry through in our conversation as well. So Scott, I'd love if you could touch on that, and then maybe also expand on, Michaela's and Jamin's response around whether or not you see these two circles coming closer. Are they intersecting? Are there gaps? Are they moving far apart? And maybe that looks different when we look at the different spaces that UX occupies today.
I mean, to the point about physicality versus digital, it's absolutely right. Like when people talk about UXR or even product research, like I feel like the general default presently is tech, which is also actually where I have a lot of my experience from. But that tends to be where people go to. But I mean, even back in the day, like when I started, I was mostly in CPG. And there, they were still split differently, different names. They weren't UXR and market research, but different names, but still split differently. Those who are developing the products versus those who are trying to market the products. And that, when I was working on product development, it was everything from the consistency of a shampoo to the design of the packaging and the release of it and how good that is. And then, you pass that over and you work on the marketing and the branding or the pricing of it, as we said earlier. And so it definitely applies. I think too often we do default to tech. That's the big sexy thing right now, but that's not to say that it's only that. In fact, oftentimes the physical version of, which is just, if not more important. Then to answer the other question kind of about like, are they coming together? Are they separating? On the client side, I think it's so much dependent upon the structure. When I first switched over to client side, we were completely separate. So there was the market research team, and then there was the UX research team. And depending on the relationships, we would be really close or we would not talk. And that was purely just based on a one-on-one person, right? Like if I went out of my way to go meet somebody and build a good relationship, awesome, we'll work together. If not, and that I think has caused a lot of the maybe like, I don't want to say friction, but like some of the separation there. Whereas more and more what I'm seeing is that we're building holistic research teams, and that will be part, UX research, part or product research, and part market research. And that I find is bringing them closer together and helping also to bring, a product team and a marketing team closer together as well, because those sides don't always communicate very well. And research can be kind of the bridge between those. So I think it's still quite dependent upon the structure of the org. Like ultimately that dictates a lot of it, but I do find it's getting more like closer together. Because ultimately what we're trying to do is the same thing, right? Like we're trying to understand the people who are there. We're trying to understand customers or potential customers and help us as a business better attract them or better serve them. And so I think the commonalities of the goals are what's ultimately bringing them closer together over time.
Fantastic. And I actually want to touch on that because I think to Michaela's point earlier, there are a lot of shared methodologies, approaches across market research, UX. I think, I've been in qualitative research for 15 years and moved into UX research in a very similar way to the way Nikki described her evolution in the industry. But I want to really hone in on one point that you made there, and you pivoted away from friction, but I'm interested in understanding from everybody's POV. I'd love to hear from everybody here. Are there key differences in the mindset between user researchers and market researchers in your experience? What are those differences, and are they playing a role in keeping these two spaces separate and apart from each other in some ways?
So, well, the first difference I see is the relation or lack thereof between product research and marketing in companies, like Scott mentioned. And in market research, if you come from the traditional school of market research, we learned that product development is one of the pillars of marketing. Together with advertising, with pricing, with distribution, classically should not exist separate from marketing. But many UXers refuse to accept that. The second difference I see is related to the researcher's role in the study of the user experience. When I talk to many UXers, I hear their pride in, we are an advocate for the user and customer. That's fine. We always been that too in market research. However, those who have been long in the industry know that no company is going to invest in improving the user experience if that improvement doesn't lead to desired business outcomes. Right. UXers don't like to talk about making money for the company, but if they don't, their roles as researchers become irrelevant. And for me, the third difference is the prevalence of do-it-yourself research. Many market research and insights groups also do that. I was on that wagon from the beginning. Remember, SurveyMonkey was one of the first ones. But we also were aware that we need input from the outside to keep the ideas fresh and keep learning. But the do-it-yourself is much more prevalent for UX teams. And now you even hear about research ops, the group handling research operations, which essentially is an in-house field operation responsible for recruitment, incentive, coordination of user testing, and interviews. They think research ops will save them money and time. And that might be the case if there is a large volume of research done on a regular basis. At the same time, there is always an opportunity cost for these operations. They quickly become high-cost centers, taking away resources from more valuable research activities. And a long time ago, many research suppliers, which were in the business of research, had dedicated field departments, and many closed them because running these operations is costly. And they were in that business. And these operations require trained staff, dedicated resources and systems, which are getting more complex. Think just about data privacy and protection laws in the US and other countries. So to me, the major causes of these differences are lack of understanding of the connection between product research, marketing, the role of research in supporting business outcomes, and a lack of awareness about the knowledge and experience accumulated in the market research field.
These are amazing points. Jamin, I'd love to get your perspective here, if you wouldn't mind weighing in.
I can't wait to hear my own voice. So I just bought this today. This is a Corsair external mechanical keyboard, and I like the noise, right? And I think what's interesting about, as I was listening to the question, you framed the question, there's probably a lot of user research user researchers that were deployed in actually crafting this keyboard, partnering with product to understand in the context of budget, what thing, because it's not made out of gold, right? So in those financial constraints, what they could invest in order to maximize that sort of that what that user is expecting. Whereas a market researcher would, and this definitely happened, they identified an ideal price point of $196 to sell this like travel size unit. So, I think it's a really good illustration of how those two disciplines, while they might functionally do the same thing, we could have done there may have been some qualitative talking to people about, their keyboard desires in the market research phase. But really, the quantifying the market opportunity was happening over there in market research, whereas the qualifying that user experience was probably happening among UX researchers. So I think that's kind of where they sit organizationally. And this is a physical product, obviously, but it happens just the same exact thing in a software framework. And to Michaela's point, she's absolutely right. You need both.
I just want to make a quick point there, because Jamin talks about the difference that seems to be what is happening now in terms of quantitative research done by market researchers and qualitative research by UXers. I will really want to dispel that misconceptions, because that's what UXers think, that we only do quantitative researches. We don't. We have been doing qualitative research forever. Remember focus groups? That was qualitative research for many years. We always done that. And so the fact that in some companies, some groups are relegated to do quant, that doesn't define the whole thing. And if you're a UXer, you only work in a couple of companies, that's the only thing they do, the inside team is relegated to that. Well, they think that's all market research. But let's talk about we do both. So sorry, Jamie, I need to have that clarification, because we really do. And you know it.
I love that. Scott, let's turn the mic over to you. What do you have to say here?
I mean, I tend to agree with everything that was just said, so I don't need to beat the horse here a little bit. I think my only point that was brought up a little bit earlier is around, I have a couple points, but one thing I want to push back on a little bit from what I said earlier is research ops is a godsend. I exist with research ops. And yes, it's a cost center, but honestly, most companies look at research as a cost center. And taking away that all of the stuff that research ops does, when I've been running research teams on the client side, it's research ops is one of the most crucial hires I can make. And so this is just a one quick push for that of yes, they are a cost, but so are we as researchers. And most companies aren't making the traction of saying, oh, we did this research and this is the profit or the ROI that we're going to get on it. That's just not really happening, despite some of the stuff that Nikki showed before. But then I think the other part that we've kind of talked about is if we take that keyboard example, right? Market research might have been the one who quantified it and did some audience exploration, saw that there was an opportunity, then it gets passed to product or UX research who helps prototype it, beta test it, do all that work. And then we'll continue, testing it and, product innovations after it's already launched. But then oftentimes it gets passed back to market research to help with how do we launch it? How do we price it? How do we build a campaign around it? But the main thing there is that for any product, you have both. And so it's not this, okay, I'm going to go do one, you go do another, and hopefully we'll meet up in the future. When that happens, you see a big misalignment. And so any successful product launch, be it physical, digital, doesn't matter. You need to have both working very closely together. I think it's just, oftentimes, in addition to the quant versus qual piece that is always brought up, right? And I fully agree on that. Everybody does both. There's also kind of this connotation of UXR or product research will tend to go like, was it like an inch wide and a mile deep, and then flip that for market research, right? And oftentimes that can be dictated by resourcing and budgeting. But I think that's another thing that oftentimes gets brought up, which is sometimes true, but I think it can be dispelled that that's not always going to be the case.
I think that's fantastic. And it actually is a perfect segue into what was going to be my next question, but also carries through into what we're seeing in the Q&A. And so Carolyn was asking, how would you like to see market research and UX research work together? And my question, which I think is very complimentary here, is, what are the things that user research can learn from market research? So I think there are two prongs here. How can we work together more cohesively along this line? And what are the kinds of things that we need to share across teams? And maybe also things that we need to consider when we're working with different clients. Is it a question around who we're reporting to? Does that shape how we're working together and what we can learn from each other? Jamin or Scott? Scott, let's go first. You were ready
just gonna
for
say
it.
Scott should answer that question, because he really already did in a lot of ways. And I totally agree with what was outlined.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I always one of my favorite personal examples is when I was working at what is now called Meta. I built a good relationship with somebody on the other side. So at that point I was market research, they were UX research, and we had just happened to be getting coffee one time and talking about hey, my stakeholders for marketing were coming with these requests for a potential product launch that, was like a year out. So I'm not really sure if this is important, what's going on with it. And then she came and said, oh, actually my product managers are coming with all this stuff about the exact same product. But these two sides weren't talking to each other. And so what we as the bridge did is we got together, her name's Katie, she's wonderful. We just brought them together and actually built out a holistic research roadmap. And we said, we're going to pull our resources, we are going to pull our time, and we're going to have a joint, research plan. We're going to have joint research presentations and knowledge sharing, and just make that all one launch versus what has traditionally been done where they are fully separated. I mean, I think that's ultimately where they come together. And in terms of what we can learn from each other, I mean, everything, right? We talk about differences as if they are major and that they can't be overcome. But I actually think more and more it's on us as researchers to say kind of what we're talking about right now, which is we shouldn't be separating ourselves. The idea that, UXR is going to go do that or market research is going to do that, I don't think is the right solution. I think the solution is we are research. We are here to help. What can we do? And happens to be product, cool. That happens to be marketing, that's great. But I think just bringing together as a holistic research function is probably going to be our best bet.
Brilliant.
Like Scott mentioned, there are a lot of commonalities that go unnoticed because each group uses different terminologies for the same approaches and methods. And at a higher level, let's start with design thinking. This is just a sexier label for product research process we have used forever in market research. Designers didn't invent this. It sounded like a novel idea because software development was driven by expertise bias. They are the engineers, they know how to do this, but failure made them realize that incorporating user feedback throughout the process would help them develop a successful process. We as researchers, market research, didn't invent product research. This is just an application of the scientific method for innovation. You gather information about unmet needs, create hypotheses about potential solutions, test those hypotheses with users, go back, refine, keep going. The problem is that we rarely have time and money to do many iterations. So some try to compress it as part of the design sprints. Many are skipping the whole process altogether now, because it has to go faster and cheaper, removing even users from the equation, so it becomes an internal exercise. By the way, this happens also in marketing and creative teams, right? They try to wing it to avoid spending time and money in research. And another commonality, like I said, is qualitative research. We have done it, we keep doing it. The moment you say market research, it creates association. That's why even the Market Research Association changed names, and now it's the Insights Association, right? We all are in the business of insights. And when I say, and I know this is heresy for those who are in the audience, when I say the UX is a discipline of market research, it's just a call to say we are researching human beings from different angles, different perspective, and we need that integration to be able to have a more comprehensive view of the customer. Because when we go to the C-suite and you go and try to present a product or an insight, and then the UX team says something that contradicts what the other team is doing, the C-suites at the end, they're going to say, we're going to go with our gut feeling, or whoever they feel they have the reason. And so you end up not really having a lasting insight that can really help the company and in the team. And so as you remove the labels, you will find there is a lot more in common than there are differences. And so I keep talking and saying, based on my own experience, my working experience before, we didn't have labels that UX or market, we just do research, and you specialize in this type of discipline. You do more of that digital product research, and maybe I do positioning research, or I do market segmentation. Qualitative is not something different. Qualitative is a methodological approach that applies to all the disciplines. And so if you approach it as a framework with fit for purpose methodologies, then you remove those labels, then that allows us to work together, to collaborate, complement each other. Because the areas are deep. Sometimes you need a specialization. They take, you cannot know everything. And so that's why. But that's why I think in terms of disciplines of the same field. You don't like market research term? Okay, let's do insights research. Come to the family. We're part of the same family.
I think that the trap is, and I just fell into this last year, I was doing a project with a actually fairly well-known UX researcher. She's a LinkedIn influencer, really well respected in the Bay Area, results for all the top companies kind of a thing. And I was using terms that for me were super common, like IR, the incidence rate, right? And that just wasn't in her vocabulary. So, the trap is that, because I've done qualitative and quantitative as a market researcher, I assume that the nomenclature transfers, but it really doesn't. So in that way, or it doesn't all the time. In that way, I think we do need to make sure that, that little like miscommunication on my part, that was a big problem. Because there was a long period of time where I'm using a term that she didn't understand, and we weren't getting clarity on, we weren't able to move forward, which sounds so silly, but it was. So anyway, that's kind of like my broader point, is that we've got to make sure that we're all speaking the same language.
I think that was the point you were making earlier, and I agree.
Yeah, I think in terms of learnings, I totally agree. And that's why I always am translating. You say, when I say one thing, this means in the other side. So I feel like a translator all the time. But in terms of learnings, I think both sides can learn from each other. First, for the UXers, and I know there's now a little movement, small, but it's a movement trying to get UXers to understand quantitative research too. And one learning from the UXer side, because there are many new people coming to that field that don't have a research background, is to get familiar with the vast arrays of methodologies we have. No need to reinvent the wheel. There are books. That's why we need terminology, so you can go back and find the books when you do a search. But there is a lot of information about qualitative, quantitative methodologies. The market research field is a 100-year-old field. It's not new. There's a lot that has been developed in research. There's a lot of research and research is still happening in that field. So that allows you to understand that we need to research this in the context of the bigger experience customers have, because customers don't think in channel. They don't make that separation of digital and physical. They just have that holistic experience, right? Market researchers, on the other side, benefits from understanding a little bit more about the psychological processes involved in digital design and interactions. UXers like to call this UX laws. They're not laws. They're just evolutionary adaptations of human perceptions and behaviors. You see that in psychology. Psychology is one of the roots of market research, one of the sciences where we have roots, plus sociology and ethnography. If you understand that a little more deeper, if you are particularly in that discipline, allows you to communicate better, get that type of communication with the designers. So you can talk in terms of the dimensions, like the emotional, the cognitive, the behavioral dimension of the user experience. And terminology is crucial, because for me, that was also a bridge when I started working in the digital world. To be able to communicate with the product team, I kind of got familiar with all that they were needing to hear to make myself understood that way.
I think that's a great point, and I think it's very clear today that we are adopting language and terminology from both sides of the business. I mean, to Nikki's earlier point, agile, iterative, these are things that are catchphrases and really like hot words that we use to sell insights every day. And so on this topic of what's hot, what's trending, I'm also really interested in pivoting this discussion towards looking at both sides of the coin, or one holistic side that is UX and market research. I'd like to switch gears and kind of dig into your thoughts around generative AI. Both spaces are just a buzz with everything ChatGPT and AI and what that impact is going to have on our industry, our jobs in the coming, I want to say few years, but who knows, maybe shorter term. And I guess my question for you is really if, how, when, where do you see AI impacting our fields? What are you already seeing?
Well, I see a lot of excitement around AI right now. I see a lot of discussions about using these tools to save time, be more efficient. Many hope to outsource the analysis to these tools. Even qualitative researchers are really interested in this. And I was recently at the QRCA conference, the Qualitative Research Consulting Association, and the sessions with more people were the ones about AI. And the dream is to push a button, not having to think, it's alive, because there is also a lot of pressure on cost cutting and fast delivery. Some people are using ChatGPT to write screeners and surveys, to summarize scripts. And the reality is that many clients don't want to pay for experienced researchers and quality research, but they are willing to pay for tools. They can do things faster and cheaper. And this happens because, unfortunately, quality expectations have gone down. And companies have accepted the idea of having good enough research. There is actually a book called Good Enough Research. And they don't notice how bad it is until there is a disaster. So for me, this sometimes is like people who don't know they need eyeglasses and they think they see well until one day when they are playing with a friend's eyeglasses and put them on, and they may see clearly how ugly the friend is. And so that can happen, right? And so it is still a lot of questions around how do we use this, but excitement, yes. I think there are a lot of applications to this. The pendulum is right now, it's swinging pretty hard to one side, but I think it will come back to middle point as people become more discerning, because it's not a panacea. It has certain applications, but it's just another tool in our arsenal.
Jamin, do you have thoughts on this topic?
I feel like I should defer to Scott, and then I'll express my point of view.
Scott.
I mean, yes, it's a tool, right? But I think like so much of the conversation around it right now are things like, Bard or ChatGPT or like Midjourney for images. But there's so many other tools that are being developed right now that I think are kind of like will blow up soon, but are still kind of flying under the radar, that are beyond those, that are going to be really useful for us. Like I'm using Rose right now, which is really good for like finding and visualizing data. Prompt Storm helps me write prompts. Gamma helps to like build presentations. If you've ever worked with that one's also really good. Like there's a lot of those things that are going to be AI powered tools that, while we're talking about as AI right now, ultimately is just going to be, that like I said, I use Rose for like data. That's just going to be Rose. It's not going to be Rose AI at some point, right? Because we incorporate AI into things and then we use that as whatever it happens to be. So I think while the hype is around AI, and it should be, and it will continue to be really useful, it's going to become something that we incorporate. And I think the ones who are successful with it are the ones who learn to embrace it. And the hot new job right now is prompt engineering, right? And that can become a thing for anybody. Still need to have like a lot of knowledge about the model you're doing, but like that can become a thing for anybody, but that can also be something that like research does. As she was saying before, like you, and I've done this before, like you'll use ChatGPT to help craft a discussion guide or a screener, and then you will take it and edit it and make it more human. And that stuff will continue to evolve and continue to get better, but it's the people and the companies who embrace it and learn how to use it are going to be the ones that succeed versus, kind of like what we were saying before about the market. If you invest in UX, you get the boost. If you don't, you drop. It's going to be something similar here with AI and how we as researchers incorporate it.
Fantastic.
Yeah. We used to use a slide ruler. I mean, that was how we did math, and like literally. And then we adopted computers. And then SPSS came around. So you could do things like run regression analysis you had to write code, but it was much simpler than actually like doing the math. I think a lot of what have been hearing is not necessarily right now, but more broadly, is concern around it jeopardizing, the tool set jeopardizing research quality. And I actually think that quality is already being jeopardized other places anyways by just lack of investment, but it is just quite that literally that a tool. And successful UX researchers, market researchers, people that are excellent at their skills are going to be able to employ these set of tools, whatever they, throughout their workflows to help create better outcomes faster for their customers.
I want to jump into the chat here just quickly because Carolyn asked another really interesting question, which is, what is your take on synthetic users based on large language models taking the place of humans in research? And I guess my question, piggybacking off of that, is, are these kinds of innovations in the tech space that are impacting our work today, do you think that there's potential to bridge this gap and bring us closer together, or do you see there more as like a wedge that's going to drive us further apart from UX MRX?
That question is about the synthetic user connection with your last question is interesting. The concerns that we have now with all these technologies is because we really don't trust that people can use them in discerning ways, at least for a while, until they hit back. And so the moment you start using everything in extreme ways, then kind of it ruins it for everybody, right? You're going to still need humans and expertise to be able to realize, how to use them in a more efficient way, right? Even when you have those tools now, you don't have to run the regression by hand. But when you run SPSS and you've done it, you still need to be able to see, what is it? Is it a problem? Did I make a mistake? How is the model really running? You still need that. And that's the piece that we need to keep bringing back to when you start analyzing these tools, how to use them so we can use them wisely. And in the case of synthetic users, I'm a multicultural researcher. So I'm always, for example, concerned about biases. And synthetic users are composites of whatever the model has learned from other sources. Whereas I don't know what the sources are. I don't know what the embedded bias is. I don't know what it's telling me if I don't able to, for example, check where it's coming from, right? And also it kind of averages things. It removes noise, which is good for certain things. You still need like the wisdom of the crowd. At the same time, depending on the issue that you are researching, I'm concerned also about missing nuances of the human experience if we delegate it to the machines. Because when we take away nuances that an AI algorithm may treat as noise in the data, we are at the risk of creating rigid interpretation in a world that demands flexibility. We default to simplistic solutions in a world where problems keep getting more complex. And so finding that balance, it takes time. Right now, we are in the hype stage. All the new technologies has come always predicting something else is going to disappear. It depends of how comprehensive that technology is and touches many different areas in our lives. They might disappear or get reduced. So as researchers, we have to be vigilant.
Yeah, I think you can't discount the fact that there's inherent bias in algorithms, synthetic participants. I think that the leveraging of synthetic participants is has a really important role to play in research. And, one of the biggest problems we have as market researchers, so when you're doing like large scale research, tens of thousands or even thousands of people in a study, is that fraud is a big problem. We're seeing return rates anywhere between 45 to 95% on specific studies. Now, you think about that. If, the amount of pollution that's introduced into your sample when, you were saying 45% are bad. I mean, it's almost, if you kind of like reduce that down, you're guaranteed to have, even after you replace those people, anywhere between 15 to 20% as fraudulent or bad actors. To that end, there's always problems, especially as we've introduced more and more digital as opposed to in person, more like old school quant data collection, which had its problems too. But my broader point is, I think what's interesting about synthetic or the algorithms or the AI is that you actually can get a pretty clear picture of the user, but you're not talking to the users. And that's the point that then subsequently has to be validated.
I think that's a fantastic point. And, we are 2 minutes over time, but Scott, I'd love to hear you close us off on this topic.
I agree with everything that the panelists have said here. I think any approach that you take has bias. Any approach that you take has issues. There's no perfect solution, and AI and all these developments can be one of them. I don't think it's crazy to say, like, at this point, yes, it's all based off of what it's trained off of, right? Like, I think some of the initial models, like back in the day, were trained off of the Enron leaks, if I remember correctly. And so there's always going to be bias. So everybody talks like a Houston guy, right, from the Enron leaks. But there will be challenges with all of these, but I don't think it's that far of a stretch to say, if we fast forward a little while, that AI can get to the point where you can put in a bunch of like a segmentation solution and say, hey, go, pretend to be these users of all these different segments and put in the nuance of them. It'll never be perfect, but even going out and talking to users right now is not perfect either. So I think it's just another solution that we can use, and it's up to us as researchers and the organizations that we work for to figure out what those risks are and how to mitigate them as best as we possibly can.
I just want to put just one quick point added to Scott. You could argue that humans also bring biases into the analysis, but this can be mitigated by working in diverse research teams that allow us to reduce experiential blindness and triangulate insights. We can probe, we can retest, we can keep iterating. History has shown that we are at our best when we collaborate and learn through human-generated algorithms. This is what's happening in our interactions with each other. And so that's the piece that we need to keep in mind.
I think that was the perfect point to end this discussion on. Thank you to everybody listening in. Thank you to our wonderful panelists for giving us your time, lending your expertise, your perspectives. We are looking forward to hosting more of these in the future. So for everybody in the audience that's interested, throw some ideas in the chat. What do you think is most pressing today in the market research space, in the UX space? What do you want to know more about? And so with that, I will say thank you all. Have a wonderful day, and let's get to some good work.